In this video, I'm going to take you through making your own sourdough starter culture from scratch in just 7 days. I do find that the best way to start is to begin by mixing a big jar of your starter food. This is comprised of white baker's flour and rye flour. In this jar, I am mixing 250 grams of baker's flour and 250 grams of rye flour. This gives me half a kilo of starter food ready to go, and that makes feeding my starter each day really straightforward and quick. I've found that this particular combination of flours, the white and the rye, makes a really good starter base for any kind of sourdough baking that I might do. So this is what I use for all of my breads. And I do find that the combination of the rye and the wheat makes a really active starter, much more so than what I would get if I were just using a plain wheat starter. Mix your flours until they're really well combined, and now you've got a 500 gram jar of starter food ready to go. To make your starter, take a clean jar. I really like these weck jars because they have a lid that allows the starter to breathe. Take 50 grams of your starter food and combine this with 50 ml of water. This is to make what we call a 100% hydration culture. That just means that the ratio of flour to water is equal, or 50-50. Your starter will prefer a consistently hydrated environment, and knowing the hydration level of your starter will make it easier for you to calculate the hydration level of the dough that you make, but more on that later. The quality of your water is really important. If you have chlorinated water, try to boil and cool the water before you use it, making sure that the chlorine has evaporated off. Chlorine and starter are not great friends. To mix, I like using a chopstick. I find it combines the flour and water really effectively. Once mixed, your starter will be smooth and thick. Put the lid on and leave it somewhere warm for a full 2 days or 48 hours. After 48 hours, hopefully you'll be able to see some bubbles. This is the beginning of your fermentation. If you can't see any bubbles yet, don't worry, they will come. It'll be to do with the quality of your flour, the temperature of your environment, and so on. Just be patient and continue as per these instructions. Now, you need to take off about half of your starter. This is to keep the acid levels low so that your starter can maintain its good health. At this point, you'll feed your starter a further 50 grams of your starter food and 50 ml of clean filtered water. Once again, you should use a chopstick to give it all a good mix. Put the lid on and leave it somewhere warm. This time though, you'll only be leaving it for 24 hours. Your starter is being populated by naturally occurring yeasts in the air, so whenever you're putting a lid on your starter, make sure that it's not one that screws tight. The lid should just sit on top and not seal. 24 hours has passed and I can see some more bubbly activity in my starter culture. It also has a lighter kind of feel and appearance. Hopefully it's starting to smell a bit cidery, maybe a little bit like beer, maybe like banana or apples. See what you think. Once again, discard about half of what's there and feed the remainder 50 grams of your starter food and 50 ml of water, giving it a good mix with your chopstick. You're going to wait 24 hours and repeat this process again. Then you'll wait a further 24 hours and repeat again. So essentially, you mixed your starter on day 1, you discarded and fed on day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6. This brings us to day 7. By this stage, I would expect you to have a fairly bubbly and active starter. It should smell cidery like beer or a bit fruity, and it should be quite aerated. Now you are ready to make up your starter for making bread, so we're going to do things a little bit differently. Get rid of most of it, about 90%. You want to keep your acid levels in your starter really, really low to maintain good, healthy starter and to be able to build a strong bread where the protein structures are not destroyed by the high acid load. You're going to need to put in a bit more flour and water this time so that you have the right quantity of starter for your recipe. We'll be adding 100 grams of your starter food and 100 ml of fresh water. Mix these together with your chopstick, cover your jar, and leave it somewhere warm. If you do this part of the process just before you go to bed, tomorrow morning you'll have 200 grams of active starter ready to make your first 2 loaves. How exciting! Now, if you feel that your starter is not looking like mine, isn't bubbly, isn't active, just continue the process on for a few days and see how it goes. just discarding half and feeding 50 grams and 50 mils every 24 hours. After a few more days, I would expect you to see bubbles. If you don't, we can troubleshoot a few things. Perhaps your environment is too cold or alternatively too hot. You're aiming for somewhere in the mid 20 degrees, ideally 26 degrees, give or take. It could also be that your starter can't breathe properly. If you are using a jar with a lid, make sure that the lid is ajar so that your starter is protected from dust and other things getting inside, but air can still get in a little bit. This is what's going to populate the starter with wild yeast. So there you have it, a beautiful active starter that, if treated right, will help you make sourdough for the rest of your days. Time for us to get started with the recipe.